In this video, I'll be doing a cooling system drain and flush on my 2005 Honda Pilot. This service should be done every 3 years, 60,000 miles, or 96,000 kilometers. I have three 3.78 liter jugs of deionized water, and I also have three 3.78 liter jugs of Honda specific coolant. I got a screwdriver, although I don't use that very much. I got pliers and gloves, a funnel, some shock rags, and I have 2 drip pans, and you probably do want 2 because this actually makes a little bit of a mess. So before you start doing anything on the cooling system, generally you take off the radiator cap. This one's a little warm because I just put it up on ramps, but it's not particularly hot. And as you can see, because I got a sloped driveway, I've built some ramps and I got some 2x2s in there for chocks. The drain valve is accessible on the passenger side at the lower corner of the radiator, and there's a square cutout where you can reach up through the skid plate. And there's also a small circle in the skid plate where the coolant is supposed to drain through. You can see it there. I find it makes a mess and doesn't exactly go through that small hole. Now I found the drain valve was a little bit tight to start with, so I'm using the pliers just to loosen it up. And that's the only time I'm going to use the pliers throughout this entire video. So all you need to do is reach up. It's a bit of a blind reach because you're reaching through the skid plate, and turn it to the left, and you do not need to remove the drain valve all the way. Just partially open it and the coolant will flow through the drain valve. As you can see, it doesn't exactly flow out through that hole perfectly, and it starts making a bit of a mess. And this is where the 2 drip pans will come in handy. If you're doing this, perhaps you'll get luckier than me and it'll all flow out properly, but that was not my experience on any of the changes. After it flowed for a while, it did get a little bit better. While the radiator is draining, you could remove the coolant reservoir. I found it was a little bit stuck in there, so I sprayed some WD-40 where the metal and plastic meet, and once that was allowed to sit for a second, the reservoir came straight up. And like I said, you can do some concurrent activity here and clear the reservoir. Now, because it's a little bit dirty inside, I'm going to give it a shake out with some deionized water. And if you have 3 jugs of this, that's more than enough to clean the reservoir as well as do a radiator flush. And although it's not necessary to clean the exterior of the reservoir, I find it is useful to observe the radiator fluid level. So there you can see it's all cleaned up and ready to go back in, and you can easily see the maximum and minimum lines on the reservoir. Now that it's all cleaned up, I'll reinstall the overflow reservoir back into its location. This plastic cover did not need to come off, however, I found it was helpful to remove it to get the reservoir out on the first removal. And once the coolant has stopped flowing from the radiator, just reach up in there and close the valve. With the valve closed, I'm going to fill the radiator with the deionized water. Now, it's best to pour a little bit slowly because if you pour too quick, it'll start bubbling back out the radiator cap. Now you can see the radiator is completely filled with water, and although I didn't record it, I did also fill the overflow reservoir with water as well. And with it full and the radiator cap off, I'm going to start the vehicle and allow it to fully heat up and circulate the deionized water throughout the radiator and engine block. And you can see that it immediately goes down on startup as the water pump starts moving it through the system, and you can also see some of the air bubbles coming out of the system. I find it useful to give the upper and lower radiator hoses a squeeze every once in a while, as it helps to get additional air bubbles out, but you need to be careful because they can be hot and there are the radiator fans as well. Once the vehicle is running for a little while, I'm going to turn the heater controls to high, as well as get the RPMs up on the engine for a little bit, and that's just to further circulate the coolant throughout the systems. And because I'm doing this a few times, I'm going to have to pour the old coolant into some jugs so that I could reuse the drip pans, and I'm just leaving the vehicle running here so that it gets good and hot and circulates the fluid. At this time, my goal is to just get a good circulation of the water, and I am going to take the vehicle for about a 5-minute drive as well to actually really circulate it well. So it's been about 15 minutes and I've taken it for a drive, and the system's now blowing very hot air. Now you can see the water is moving around the radiator freely and circulating and mixing with the coolant. So after taking it for a drive, I let it cool down for about 5 or 10 minutes. Now I drain the deionized water out, which is also mixed with coolant. And once again, I'm going to drain the coolant out of the overflow reservoir. I found that each time I did this, I got approximately 4 liters of coolant out of the system. Since this is just an overflow container, I'm going to fill the reservoir with coolant while the radiator is still draining, just to speed up the process a little bit. Now that the deionized water has stopped flowing out of the radiator, I'm going to close the drain valve and fill the radiator with new antifreeze. So there you can see it is full, and once again I'm going to start the vehicle and cycle it back up. Ultimately I'm going to dump this fluid out as well, but because I used the deionized water, I'm going to have to do the whole process twice. Otherwise my coolant to water mixture would be off. And you can see it bubbling away there. I found it useful to put some shop rags around the filler cap for the radiator, just because it does spit some coolant out while it's circulating. And once again, after taking it for a 5-minute drive, allowing the temperature to come up completely, I'm going to drain the radiator, drain the overflow container, replace the overflow container, and fill it up with new coolant. And while I'm waiting for it to drain out, I'm going to put the old coolant in some disposable containers. Once the radiator is drained, close the valve and fill the radiator with new coolant. Because I did the flush with deionized water, I do need to do the coolant flush twice to bring me back above a 40% coolant, 60% water mixture, because I'm using 50-50 antifreeze. And once again, I'm running the engine up and getting it hot and it's circulating it. Now, because this is the last time I'm doing the change, I'm going to be a little more meticulous in ensuring that all the air bubbles are out and that the system is fully burped and there's no blockages. Now, both the Honda manual I've seen and the Haynes manual recommend you do the run-ups with the radiator cap off. And then we're going to, with the rad cap off and the heater control set to cold, hold the engine at 1500 RPM for 5 minutes, turn off the engine, and add rad fluid as required. We're going to do the exact same thing, but with the heater control set to hot, again 1500 RPMs for 5 minutes, turn it off and top it up. Then we're going to do the cycle one more time. This time it'll be max cool, 1500 RPMs for 3 minutes, turn it off and fill up the rad. And the fourth one will be on max heat, 1500 RPMs for 3 minutes, and then turn off the engine and top up the radiator for the last time. And then the last run up will be with the radiator cap on loosely and the heater on cool. Hold it at 2500 RPMs for 1 minute. After that, we're going to check the temperature of the heater, and if it's good, then the process is done. It is possible that you can just run it up and get all the air bubbles out. And after taking it for a drive, I'm just going to fill the expansion tank up, and you should check it every few days or so as you're driving around after the change. Now, the coolant and deionized water cost me $66 Canadian, and calling the Honda dealership, they quoted me $130, and that represents a $64 savings. Anyway, thanks for checking out my video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.